All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to the people of Alberta and the great province of Alberta, where it is currently 4 p.m. Alberta time. Right now, it's earlier than 6 p.m. here in Ottawa. I hope you guys are doing well. I am joined here once again by my colleague Celine Gallus from once again the great province of Alberta. Celine, how are you doing?
I just like to point out that I get so incredibly happy every time he references my province as being great and incredible because it is. I'm doing great also in that way. So thank you.
How's the
Yeah.
weather? Are you missing the weather in Alberta? What are you missing the most from Alberta?
Um, the people, the Rocky Mountains, my yeah, no, probably just those things, and the minus 27 weather with like three feet of
That's right.
snow. Is it right now? Yeah, yeah.
As I always say, the city of Ottawa is a gorgeous city, but it is so corrupt to its core. But it's beautiful, and the weather is not too bad right now. I'm also joined by Sydney Fizzer from Rebel News, once again from Alberta. Sydney, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's been an interesting day. We had the mayor of Coutts testify, so
Mhm.
it's I look forward to talking about that.
Perfect. All right. So, Celine, you are the one live tweeting today for the whole day. How did you find it? Well, what are the main takeaways from today?
Well, we had three testimonies from, well, mainly two testimonies actually, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, I believe. But we had Jim Willett, that was sorry, Sid just said that was the mayor of Coutts. His testimony was very, very interesting. We're going to have some clips for you guys to take a look at so that we can break those down more in depth. And then we had Ian Freeman at the very end. He was the Solicitor General for Ontario. And it was essentially the breakdown of transportation and the way that tow trucks were used, as well as some of the safety routes and plans constructed in and around the convoy. Also, some additional information on the convoy and any activities relating to the areas where there were convoys or slow rolls that we saw here in Ontario as well as Alberta. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. We'll get more into the third testimony that will begin tomorrow. We'll resume, I guess. But what were
Of
your main
course.
takeaways?
Well, just before we get to our main takeaways, I want to talk one that if you want to follow Sydney's live tweeting, because she is live tweeting the whole proceedings straight from Ottawa, straight from the building where the commission is being held at, you can head on to twitter.com, now owned by Elon Musk, and you can go to see Celine's account. You can go to at Celine CXLIV. So it's at Celine CXLIV.
And actually, it's SELENE. I will specify it's
So,
not a C because if I had $1 for every time,
well, there you have
go.
it, folks. Here it is on the screen. It's even easier for you to take a look at it. All right. So today, as you mentioned, we had the testimonies. I think what we will focus on the most is going to be coup, especially with our friend Sydney Fizzard, who is here. We'll take a look at the testimony from the mayor of Coutts, and we'll discuss, well, a bunch of stuff. By the way, before we begin, if you want to join us at Rebel News live events, there's going to be a Rebel News live event happening in Toronto on November 19th and in Calgary on November 25th. We will be there. Well, not necessarily. We will do our best to be there. And we will have Tamara Leash that will be there. Ezra Levin is going to be there. Sheila Gunry is going to be there. If you want to meet your favorite personalities, your favorite freedom fighters, just at Tamara Leach, you can head on to rebelnewslive.com and get your tickets for either one of those dates. All right, let's get started with the live stream by taking a look at clip number one, part of the testimony from the mayor of Coutts, Alberta, the little city of Coutts, located in Alberta, what he had to say. Let's take a look at that.
Greatly disrupted everyday life for Coutts residents. Could you maybe explain to us in what ways?
I have done a mental survey, and I think I had about a 70-30 split in the village, the 30 on my side and the 70 supporting the protest, regardless of what it meant. We still have neighbors that won't talk to each other because of the protests. They didn't get out and do. We had a lot of sympathetic people in the village who figured it was our duty to feed everybody. If they need a room, give them a room.
right, that was part of his long, lengthy testimony. In summary, what did you make of the mayor's testimony, of Jim's testimony?
Well, I thought it was very interesting because obviously, as you know, he's the mayor of Coutts. So he's going to have, obviously, again, a little bit of a different perspective in regards to the convoy that was there in Coutts. But towards the, I'm not going to jump ahead actually, but safe to say that it was interesting. And I don't think that it was, I mean, it was no Steve Bell or Peter Slowly testimony. So I didn't dislike his testimony. I'll just say. What did you think, Sid?
Well, he is the Coutts mayor, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, he's not
Yeah.
the mayor of Windsor, of
No.
Toronto. He's coming from a very small arena, I guess you could say, in some senses. So it's interesting, and in some ways, actually, I could see this. He is more beholden to those who he represents in the town of Coutts than most individuals. Like you think about the average Torontonian. When's the next time you're going to see John Tory, right? Whereas these individuals, they actually have to engage almost on a daily basis for some individuals, of course, in that proximity. It's interesting to see. And I believe, as you mentioned in the clip, my side was the 30%, the protest side was the 70%.
Yes.
And, I got to be honest, there were times, I believe, while we were down there where we heard of the mayor, sorry, I say we, Kian Simone to my left, we were down there and it felt like, and it seemed as though the mayor himself was feeding into some of the fear that was associated with the protesters, telling people, warning them about the situation in very harsh terms, you could say. So it's interesting. I think he's had to kind of, he's been forced to maintain somewhat of an even keel, or whatever the expression is there, because he is so closely associated with those who he represents in Coutts.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. He also said that he initially went, or one of the first times, he went to go and actually meet the protesters. This was actually pulled from a CTV interview that he did at that time of the convoy there in Coutts, where he revealed that he initially went down to go and meet the protesters to see if they were as bad as like mainstream media portrayed them to be. And then he very soon after revealed that they were not only not bad and not as bad as mainstream media had portrayed them to be, but actually they were peaceful. And he made mentions of them. Some of them he realized were his neighbors and whatnot, and that he saw it was a very major portion of Coutts that he was able to see, like residents, locals, friends, I dare say, potentially family. But Coutts is very small, if you're not aware. Coutts, Alberta is a speck right before the border of Montana. So
Well, it's a small town, I think. No, I never been to Coutts, but I think you've
I
been
wouldn't
to
think
Coutts.
so.
Yeah,
Yes, I've been to Coutts. Yeah,
Sydney's been to Coutts. K2, Kian Simone has been to Coutts as well. You've all been covering what happened at the Coutts border blockade. From what you've seen in Coutts, does his testimony corroborate what he saw with the protesters, the general dynamic that he was talking about in regards to the protesters at the Coutts border? Do you think what he said corroborates what you saw on the ground?
I can only speak from, honestly, like the 2 days that I was actually there, but I know that Sid and Keen would have a lot better opinion on there.
Specific senses?
Well, I'm not sure. The testimony, he talked about how in the text messages that we saw presented at the commission, we saw him refer to the truckers as domestic terrorists. Do you agree with that sentiment? I know that we had a quick scrum with him afterwards, which we will show later. But
personally, I would suggest them to be domestic terrorists. But in terms of his approach on the situation, I think he was trying to adhere to very specific legal terms and guidelines in his approach.
Yeah.
But being down there, I think it's fair to say with a heavy hand is how his dialogue came towards the protesters from the get-go.
Yeah.
And I think he also mentioned that in his view, in Coutts, Alberta, the people supporting the protest, there were 70% of the population in Coutts that supported the protest and 30% that were opposed to the protest. And I think that we saw, Marco in his testimony, he talked about how he would talk and negotiate and have discussion with the school boards and the residents that were there. I think both testimonies contradict themselves a little bit, with Marco saying that he spoke to a lot of the people in the city, he wasn't able to negotiate with them, and then the mayor saying that, well, there was a huge split in the city.
Well, and you gotta think about how the mayor's conversations were going with the federal, or not, pardon me, the federal government, but the provincial government, right?
Mhm.
How sturdy was their communication? And then you replicate that with the provincial government and the federal government.
Mm.
Well, how sturdy was their communication, right? Were they actively assisting and had great communication? No, it seems like the protesters themselves were probably the best communicators out of the bunch. Even though there may have been attempts made, it just seems ultimately that there was a clogging of the system in terms of the internal communications of our government.
Well, very much so. And a really good example of that would be the fact that it came to light that then Transport Minister of Alberta, Rajan Sawhney, actually had plans to go to Coutts to be able to hear them out and try to negotiate. And it seems that she was actually prevented from doing that by the provincial government. So you talk about the miscommunications, not just when you have a huge organization of people that are, for the better part, totally leaderless, that are trying to work together. And then you have the government, they're trying to work together to try and see what to do. And then when someone finally proposes that they go forward and they're able to hear them out and strike a deal, which we didn't see anywhere else except for maybe when it also came to light yesterday in Windsor that what was it, the governor,
A letter.
Yeah, there was a letter that was sent to Windsor and was withheld from them because the worry was how could the very small in comparison to the convoy in Ottawa, how could that small group of people there at Windsor have the letter sent to them and not have a letter sent to Ottawa? So same thing, lots of communications. That narrative we know. It's very familiar to us at this point.
The longer the commission goes on, the more it seems like it was a centralized effort in the sense that it was one person guiding the ship from high up above. In many senses, and the broken telephones from above. And it, in many ways, it's quite the opposite of the demonstrations that were taking place. It wasn't like who's the chain of the command, and this is one of the issues that they're alluding to with the Freedom Convoy and with the Coutts blockade is there was no one guy, one face image to these demonstrations. There was no leader, and because of that, it was the communication of those who presented themselves at these demonstrations that was the communal conversations they were having is what drove their movement, as opposed to what we see on the government end, where it seems like they would just ask the person above them, keep on going up the chain. And unfortunately, that message, or that the response that came back down was not indicative or was not useful to the individuals who were requesting this assistance. It was a decree brought down upon them.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at the second clip we have where the mayor, Jim Willett, speaks to whether or not, from what he saw, there was any sort of violence or harassment during the Coutts border blockade. Let's take a look at what he had to say to that.
Did you observe any violence or harassment during the protest?
Never did. No.
Did you yourself receive any threats?
Yes. I got one death threat online, Facebook. Serious enough that the RCMP took it seriously. I'm not sure how good a threat it was because it was sent from a personal page.
That reminds me a little bit of what Jim Watson had when he said there was a death threat about someone going to a mall and shoot him.
Well, you see, but what's interesting about this specific instance is that he doesn't go in depth about what the threat was. He says that there was a threat, and he doesn't actually go into detail much more than that. And then he actually works towards kind of revealing that he's not serious if it was actually a real threat because the person used you're not going to make an actual serious violent death threat to anybody on your public. Imagine doing that. Imagine using your Twitter or your Facebook to do that, to private message someone and actually be like, hey, so this is what's going to happen. That's not credible. And that doesn't make sense. They would have for sure looked more into that.
If I can add to that, this might be a clip we need to find, but Kian Simone, while he was at the Coutts blockade, he brought to light how former Premier Jason Kenney's statement about an RCMP officer being assaulted was actually a blatant lie.
That's right.
I don't know where exactly this might have come from, the internal communications perhaps of the Kenney government, but it's very interesting to see the kind of, I guess you want to call it a narrative that's being put
Yep.
forward by them.
Yeah, it absolutely is a narrative. And again, doesn't matter if the blockade or the protests took place in Coutts, Alberta, Windsor, Ontario, or here in Ottawa, it's the same narrative that the government officials are all painting.
No, definitely. And we'll go back to the mayor's testimony in a few minutes. Before that, I want to show following his testimony, and that's something that honestly I was glad to see, because Liberals never agree to speak to us. 4 PCs never agree to speak to us. Jim Watson, we saw what happened when we tried to speak to him. Failed mayoral candidate Catherine McKinney didn't want to speak to me. But this mayor, even though he opposed the movement, agreed to speak to us after his testimony. We're able to ask him a few questions that I think we'll find interesting. So take a look at how our exchange with the mayor of Coutts, Alberta, went. Hey, sir, super quick question from me. You said that 70% of the residents of Coutts, in your opinion, agreed with the protests with the truckers, but you also called them in a text message domestic terrorists, the truckers. So is it fair to say that you consider your town a terrorism supporting town if you think that 70% of them agree with the truckers?
Is it fair to say what?
That you consider your town and 70% of the residents agreed with the truckers. Is it fair to say that you consider your town a terrorism supporting town?
I guess you could twist it to say that, sure.
Did you still have the same view that the truckers were domestic terrorists?
I think whoever okayed blocking the highway was possibly there. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer.
And do you agree with the general, just last thing, do you agree with the general message of the convoy or of the blockade? Do you agree with what they were fighting for?
What the weapons were planned for?
No, I'm not talking about the weapons. I'm talking, do you agree with the general message of the convoy in terms of the mandates, the border restrictions and everything? Do you agree with what they were standing for?
I think they were there first over the, as I said before, the federal governments of both the U.S. and Canada had suddenly said that these guys that had been doing cross-border trucking had no more permission to do that unless they got vaccinated. Right. Where for 2 years they had been allowed to go back and forth. Somebody said they were gods. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but they were the guys that were carrying all the weight. And suddenly the mandates applied to them as well. And I think it was bad timing. I think it was bad politics. It wasn't delivered properly. But it's way above my pay grade.
You know, I think it's a little bit of an odd response. I fail to see where he actually aligns in terms of what he thinks of, well, the vaccine mandates, the mandates for truckers. You know, the truckers were the ones that were bringing us food for the past since we're born, really, and they were the heroes of the pandemic. They were the ones that were able to go from the US to Canada, bring us food, bring us milk, bring us what we needed to get to live our life properly. And then Justin Trudeau said, we don't need that. We don't care about you. We're going to impose a strict authoritarian mandate on you. Even with all the hard work you've been doing, just because you refuse to get the COVID-19 vaccine, you will not be allowed to do your job and serve Canadians properly. I think it was disgraceful for Justin Trudeau to take that move, but I don't know if you saw it differently, but I failed to see where the mayor aligns in terms of Justin Trudeau's decision. And also above his pay grade, that's not a good response for me. You know, you're the mayor, you're representing those people. They elected you to represent them. How is it above your pay grade to talk about an issue that affects them? I find it very weird.
Yeah, you know, I mean, okay, you just went on a little bit of a tangent, so I'm trying to remember exactly. But the point I wanted to be very specific about is that he said that he didn't oppose the protest in Coutts. He said that he didn't. It was only at the point that he started to see the locals become affected by, if that was, interfering with supply chain, local businesses, etc. That's what he meant. Like, maybe it's just because I'm an Albertan or because I have a little bit of sympathy for the men, or empathy, I suppose. but it really is just such an Albertan thing, especially small town Southern Albertan, to just be really, that's like your family, that whole town. And I believe that I could see from his testimony that it was very difficult for him to try and structure his narrative with what I propose to be the narrative that is supposed to fit this entire inquiry. And it was a little bit frustrating because I think, again, like he said, he just really spoke about it from such a sympathetic standpoint. And he made those references to those people being, some of his neighbors, like friends. Like, you live in such a small town, you're bound to know. You could probably throw a stone and you'd hit within that proximity every person that's in Coutts.
Well, one of the other things too is that while I agree with that, and I'm sure he's super close to his constituents, especially in a small town like you say. Do you come from a small town in Alberta?
My friend, I come from Calgary, Alberta.
Calgary. That's not a small town, but I remember in a past interview that he did a little while ago in February, he spoke about the mandates. He spoke about what the federal government is doing, what the federal government imposed on the truckers who deliver us goods and frankly make us live our life every single day. And he didn't seem to be the biggest fan of the federal government. So while he seemed shy today to actually answer the question, give a clear position on the mandate, he spoke a while ago about his view of the federal government, and he said, and I quote, that you can't win a battle with the federal government. Let's take a look at what he said back in February.
Their first attempt didn't appear to go too well, so how confident are you that they'll get this done?
Well, I had actually my deputy mayor, who used to work for CBSA for a number of years till he just retired, says you never win a battle with the government. So it's unfortunate that people have taken it to this extreme. And as I've said to everybody that asked me about this, I just want it to go away.
So you see, while he says that no one wins a battle with the government, he still doesn't seem to agree with the fact that the protesters were there, and the protesters said, I don't care, I'm standing my ground because that is my right. He said that they were taking it to extreme, which I find, once again, very odd. I find his answers a little bit weird. What do you think, Sid?
Yeah, I could say a little bit weird. And I wanted to actually touch on one of the things you guys brought up earlier was the affected local businesses. Now, I can't speak to every single business that was in the town of Coutts, but the hotel that was in the area, I believe, was completely booked. We even stayed there, me and Kian Simone, at this motel for a day or two, I believe, completely booked the entire time. And as well, I believe there's a diner, actually, that a very small diner, very quaint. It was like an Airbnb thing, great people that ran it as well. And I believe they were getting hassled all the time. If not, I believe actually while we were at the blockade, they were shut down by AHS because of violating COVID regulations. So it's kind of funny to think that that shop would have been open. It would have been packed every single day for guys looking to get a hot breakfast, looking to get those rooms. I mean, the rooms, I believe, continued on, but the government itself, even while the blockade was occurring, was actively shutting down businesses in Coutts, a very small town. And I remember the duty free. There was a lot of things that even the protesters, the demonstrators weren't allowed to get because of the police barriers and such. And the duty free location, I think for obvious reasons, you weren't able to shop there to get some of the stuff that you needed. But there was the supplies that you needed in that shop within eyeshot that nobody was allowed to use or access, even in this time of grievance.
Yeah, and just before we let you go, because I see we have our next guest coming on, we'll have them in 5 minutes. I want to take a look at clip number 4 where Mayor of Coutts, Alberta, Mayor Willett, speaks to his relationship, to a phone call he had with former Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney. Let's take a look at what he had to say about Kenney.
You also had a phone call with the Premier?
I did.
And at no time did you make requests for specific supports or assistance from the province?
I think when I talked to the Premier, we talked more in generalities. As I said earlier, he was kind of caught in a pinch point between darned if I do and darned if I don't. We talked about that. He talked about the fact that he could only do so much because of the lack of surge capacity in the hospitals. He mentioned that he was going to be talking to governors in the northern states to see if they would put pressure on that side, because even if we did get rid of the provincial mandates, the federal mandates still sat there, and that was the thing that triggered the whole deal in the first place. So, no, it was more a generality thing. I did not hit him up for any kind of.
No, do you think, Celine, that had we had a different premier in Alberta, different than Jason Kenney, we will still have had all of these mandates in Alberta?
My opinion is potentially. I don't know. Those mandates were pretty much all over the world. So I really can't answer that with any. I don't have confidence in that. No, actually, I don't, unfortunately.
Think about the last 2 years that we've gone through, right? Like, who would have thought that Premier Jason Kenney, I mean, I'm not a fanboy of long time or of short time for that matter, of Premier Kenney, but who would have thought 2.5 years ago that he would have been the man he is today?
Yeah.
You know, who can say that about any politician?
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, international phenomena, the COVID narrative and pursuant actions by governments. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
No, for sure. Honestly, I'd really love to be a fly on the wall in terms of those backdoor conversations that go on within government. So, yeah.
Yeah, but while you know the mandates that the people were protesting in Ottawa and mandates that people were protesting in Windsor and even Coutts, as a matter of fact, were all federal mandates. In Coutts, they were protesting the federal border mandates. In Ottawa, they were protesting the federal COVID-19 mandates. But we still saw in Ottawa people carrying flags and signs regarding François Legault, the Premier of Quebec. And we saw some carrying flags and signs about Jason Kenney, then Premier of Alberta. And while they were there officially to protest federal mandates, they were also there, I feel, to protest the Premiers, Jason Kenney and François Legault. Did you feel the same way when you were at Coutts?
Sorry,
that they were protesting the provincial government as well.
Of course,
as the federal government.
It goes without saying that anywhere that they set up these blockades, they were very aware of who was in charge, who had put the mandates in play, and that was a conversation that I heard, and it would not be hard to guess was there within those areas. Yes. Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, to say the least.
Yeah.
Of course.
Premier Jason Kenney and the mandates that we saw in Alberta were a very large part of why they were protesting. I mean,
yes.
I believe, as Marco mentioned yesterday, or I don't know who mentioned it, but 2 weeks to slow the spread, right? And then look where we are now. That's the federal aspect of things. And then you've got Premier Jason Kenney. You know, it's going to be open for summer. We're not going to have a vaccine passport.
Yeah.
But we're going to have a restrictions exemption program.
Yeah.
That is just the same thing as a vaccine passport, except for the name.
Yeah.
And I think he kept on doing that. Actually, I think Coutts was there as well for that groundbreaking answer from Premier Kenney. And it's just this repetition of, oh yeah, just hold on, I'm not gonna do that. Oh, make this
exactly.
like this. How about that? This struggle session these politicians are doing with their citizens in terms of pushing through mandates when they know their citizens don't want it.
Well, I think those are the longest 2 weeks we've ever seen. Just last week, even a few days ago, I think I saw an article saying that there was a university in Ontario that is reinstating mass mandates for students attending classes in the lecture hall, which is absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, thanks so much for coming on, Sid. We'll move on to our next guest. Before we get to our next guest, we will go to a quick ad break. And when we come back, we'll have the great lawyer for Freedom Corp, Eva Chipyuk, who you've been hearing a lot from in the past 4 weeks. Stay tuned.